Tekken 4 has long been a game of controversy. If you only remember it from your young, nostalgic years, you might not even be aware, but the initial perception of Tekken 4 had not been particularly great. In recent years, however, the perception of this game has changed quite significantly. People started recognizing its unique artistic direction, putting a more serious tone on the usual Tekken formula and doubling down on it with character prologues and epilogues, accompanied by beautifully drawn visuals and more elaborate ending movies. All of this builds an especially dark and sinister atmosphere that a lot of people seem to enjoy, but what part of that is caused by the music? And more importantly, is the music good? Let's take a listen. Unlike many people online, I remained skeptical of Tekken 4 for quite a while. I don't have a great deal of nostalgia for it, and back when I replayed every Tekken game a few years ago, Tekken 4 was honestly one of the more boring experiences. Except Tekken Force, that was a lot of fun. But today we're not here to discuss the competitive balance of the roster or the voice acting in the ending movies.
You're finally here. So,
what the fuck do you want?
Or Heihachi's outfit. What were they thinking? Today, we're here to listen to the soundtrack. Tekken 4's console OST features 2 CDs with 21 tracks each. The first CD contains the stage and credits tracks from the console version of the game, while the second one contains all the background music from the character endings. To keep these videos decently short and the release schedule somewhat regular, we will once again not cover any of the arcade tracks or character endings. I know. Under my Tekken Tag tournament video, a lot of you mentioned that I had missed out on the arcade versions of some of these tracks, so I do want to take them into account this time. However, since I'm recording this right now, after the whole script is already finished, I can tell you up front, there was not a single arcade version I prefer over the console version in this game. Just so you know. The 21 tracks we'll be listening to today are composed by familiar names Akitaka Toyama, Yu Miyake, Satoru Kosaki, and Hiroshi Okubo. Without further ado, let's kick things off with Tekken 4's opening theme. Tekken 4's opening movie is so freaking iconic. We'll take a more detailed track on this look for sure. The first few seconds already are absolutely god tier. The melodic chant at the start is stunningly eerie. It sounds like multiple voices are layered on top of each other, although I do have a hard time recognizing whether they move in parallels, in unison, or if one of them stays on one frequency while the melody is sung by the other. Whatever the process might have been, the resulting timbre of the singing sounds creepy as fuck. I love it. The melody itself is short and concise. You remember it right after the first listen, and its character is incredibly suspenseful. This is supported by a low pedal note in the bass, giving this section the foundational weight it requires. There is some modulation effect on top of this note that does offer some movement in its higher overtones. This effect rounds off the soundscape of this intro perfectly. It sounds even more uneasy because of it, without taking away anything from the melody. Awesome. The chant ends, but not by fading out or being cut off. Instead, the singing abruptly moves upwards to break out of the melody almost in a rushed manner. All of this emphasizes how sinister Tekken's volcano-throwing family feud story actually is, and that never really came across as such in the previous entries. The next section is basically all drums and percussion. The congas in particular are very audible and add an extra layer of confusion and chaos, which fits both the story of Tekken 4, with Kazuya being resurrected after 20 years from a volcano and such, as well as the fast cuts of the movie itself, jumping between the Tekken Force units storming into the G-Corp building, and a new fighter Steve absolutely humbling his opponent in the ring. Christie's portrayal doesn't really fit this at all. She doesn't show off any capoeira moves, nor is her connection to Eddie via her grandfather referenced in any way. She's just a puppet presenting her attractive body and awkward smile to the audience. Ridiculous female character portrayals were definitely not less rampant back then. One musical gripe I have with this section is its length. When I only listen to the track, it becomes very evident. But even while watching the movie alongside of it, I noticed that the chaotic vibe of this drum and percussion section overstays its welcome, at least slightly. After a short revisit of the intro section, we get a steadier groove with a very free jazzy sax solo. This fits right in with the surprising appearance of Kazuya, destroying the Tekken 4 soldiers one by one with his most iconic moves. I do wish the solo was a bit longer though. I really enjoy its presence in this tune. After a brief interlude that sounds overall muffled, we get another saxophone lick, however it's barely 10 seconds long this time. Of course, it flows perfectly with the scene jumps in the movie, so I suppose it is a somewhat necessary sacrifice. This part also contains some high synth notes in the background, reminding me of the floaty vibe of Tekken Tag Tournament's OST. The track ends with only the low bass note rumbling away underneath Kazuya's and Heihachi's one-liners, setting up the story of Tekken 4 beautifully. My overall impression is that this opening movie track is incredible. I already knew I would love it going into this, but listening to it so many times and with greater detail only really enhanced this feeling. I feel like I appreciate it even more now. My main complaint is that while the conga section feels a bit too long, the following sections all feel a bit short and rushed. Maybe it really was intentional, and it does work out well in the sense that I can still enjoy them a lot, and it makes me want to listen to the track again immediately after, just to hear more of these parts. But I do wonder if they could have been made a tad bit longer without losing their appeal. I guess we'll never know, but I digress. Interestingly enough, I don't feel like this opening tune gives away the general direction of Tekken 4's OST at all, at least not in the same fashion as Tekken 3 or Tekken Tag Tournament. Since I'm not as familiar with this game as I was with some of its predecessors, I'm very curious what's awaiting us ahead. A Fist for a Fist is absolutely lovely. Let's see if the remaining songs in this game can deliver. Next up is the Embu theme, Acid Timpani, and I gotta be honest here, I had no idea there was an Embu movie in Tekken 4. This track follows the formula of past Embus by being very rhythmic and accentuating the movements on screen. This time only Jin is performing his katas, or whatever they might be called, which does emphasize the stronger focus on the Mishima family feud in this game and Jin's character changes specifically. This time the music is very reserved. We hear a combination of various drumming sounds and a plethora of rather harsh synth sounds, trading short melodic ideas back and forth. To me, this creates a feeling of unease, which fits very well with this movie's context. After all, Jin is all alone in this dojo, seemingly at night, performing his moves with maximum focus. Around the middle, the track actually establishes a consistent groove and a short, repeated melody. I like this change of pace, but I don't feel like Jin's movements really amp up in the same way the music does. Kind of a wasted opportunity in my eyes. On a few occasions, we can hear a robotic voice saying the mission is controlled over the otherwise instrumental tune. I'm a bit conflicted with this sound. On one hand, I'm not a big fan of these spoken lines with heavily distorted voice effects, and I complained about them at length in the Tekken Tag Tournament OST analysis because every other track in that game had an effect like that. On the other hand, this Embu track feels very chaotic and unnerving. It fits into Tekken 4's overall style that the Gaming Bridge show fittingly dubbed digital dystopia, a style in early 2000s video games that also partially made its way into the Tekken series. He made a great video on Tekken 4's Atmosphere, you should definitely check that one out. The other synth sounds in this piece also sound very harsh and out of place in a way, but that's exactly what makes them work, and this voice does feel very similar. The fact that it only briefly appears twice makes it even more tolerable for me, so I would say its integration is a bit better than I remember from Tekken Tag Tournament. Overall, a nice change of pace for an Embu tune and fitting for the game it's in. Next up is the character select theme. This tune is dominated by an electric guitar with a very thick sound. It's well rounded and cozy, I love this guitar tone. On top of that, there is no clearly audible pulse. Yes, the guitar does follow a specific tempo, but everything we hear sounds so fluid that you might as well perceive it as free time. This is such a nice change of pace to all the previous character select themes, and a stark contrast to most Tekken OSTs in general. I really appreciate that. The blurry quality of the guitar is supported by the other sound effects that briefly fade in and out of the soundscape, like the heavily distorted voice or some of the high synth notes in the background. I really enjoy how Tekken 4 continues the trend of creating a completely different vibe for every new character select track. Jet is unlike any of its predecessors. They all go for a different vibe, which I already compared in my previous video, but Jet is just something else. It has such a dreamy quality to it, and nothing in this musical composition rushes you to get into the action quickly. Instead, it feels like everything is at halt for a brief moment as you glance through this imposing selection of fighters. Honestly, listening to the intro piece and then this, it kind of makes me want to play Tekken 4. Shocking, right? Incredible work. Let's hope it continues like this. For the first time in Tekken history, the story of each character is not only developed in the ending movies, and I suppose the game manuals, but who's reading those anyway? I didn't even know they existed as a kid. Tekken 4 introduces prologues, short narrations of the character's current situation leading up to the tournament, including their motivation for participating. This, accompanied by a slideshow presentation of important moments and the hand-drawn, unexpectedly dark style of these visuals, is extremely satisfying to look at. There's so much emotion conveyed in some of these pictures. Just look at Brian here, feeling utterly abandoned by Dr. Abel, struggling to survive in his slowly deteriorating body and fueled by his anger alone. Not all story bits are as serious or depressing, but the atmosphere of these prologues make even the silliest things appear shockingly dramatic. I mean, look at Combat's prologue here. This thing looks threatening, even creepy in these pictures. Doesn't really match his ending movie, does it? The soundtrack Fetus plays a huge part in building this exact atmosphere. I might even say it carries it on its shoulders. The bass plays a simple groove, but goes up a semitone from the root ever so often. This small detail is indispensable for this track's tense feeling. Every component in this tune is very reserved. Especially at the start, there is a lot of empty space, just making you wonder what's about to come. Over time, more and more elements are added, and each of them help in building this eerie atmosphere. Listen to this screeching sound, for example. It comes out of nowhere, is extremely unusual for a Tekken track, and delivers a sense of uncertainty that you could not achieve otherwise. I'd love to know what they sampled for the sound, but the strong delay effect plays a huge role in its creepiness. With the introduction of the soft, almost muffled piano riff, we get a bit more musical substance. The track ramps up as more and more instruments join in. The electric guitars serve as a small callback to the previous track, but also act as a dramatic call to action for the player. The piano chords that join briefly after add even more grooviness. What I particularly love is the snare sound near the end. It seems like there is a strong reverb effect placed on it, making it resonate extremely long. You can really feel its weight with every hit. Fetus is incredible. Even though it offers a stark contrast to the previous track, Jet, it somehow feels like they still belong together. Jet is more cozy, while Fetus is eerie, but they are made with the same musical spirit, if that makes any sense. I love how Fetus draws me into every character's personal life, how it allows me to feel their hardships, how it makes me care. Plotlines in fighting games are almost always poorly written and silly, so this feat is monumental in my opinion. I genuinely enjoy watching these prologues just because the music and the visuals are so good. Each component in this track is carefully placed and serves a purpose. Together, they achieve an atmosphere that is unparalleled in this franchise. So far, at least. I don't have much more to say. Listen to it yourself and you'll understand. With Uninhabited, we kick off the stage tracks of Tekken 4, and this tune belongs to them all. It's noteworthy how this game's stages mostly take place in regular everyday locations. In some of them, there are even bystanders spectating in the background, which can sometimes lead to unexpected disruptions. A cool idea for sure, but not very well executed. Now, to me, personally, Uninhabited feels very boring. I wish I had anything more detailed to say, but this track's worst offense is that it doesn't excite me. It doesn't evoke any kind of emotion, and that's basically the only thing that music needs to do. There are no particular sounds that I find unappealing or annoying, but there is also no musical element here that I find particularly memorable. It works well with the stage aesthetics, it's easy to listen to, but that's really it. To me, anyway. Let's move on. Didgerhythm is audible in the jungle stage. In a way, it feels very fitting. On one hand, we have what I suppose is the didgeridoo, or at least the sound that's supposed to imitate it, and the very dry kick drum. Together they sound very earthy and exactly what I want to hear when I fight in a deep spot of unspoiled nature. On the other side, the first thing we hear is a big band style brass section playing some very dramatic chords. This combination seems a bit unusual, but I really enjoy this intro. After leaving the spotlight to the didgeridoo drum combo, the brass reappears later and provides more intensity. It feels like a small climax within this track, and the synergy between these two instrument groups is surprisingly great. All of this does remind me of Nina's Tekken 3 track, which I love for its unique sound within that game. They are still very different though. I feel a bit torn on Didgerhythm. I like its uniqueness, I love the dramatic moments with the brass section, but all of this somehow doesn't feel as well-rounded and consistent as some of the first few tracks. It just started too good. I'd say I like it, but it's probably not gonna be in my top picks of this game. Still, pretty good. Alright, listen. As soon as I heard the piano kick in, I knew this was gonna be a certified banger. It just sounds so cozy, but still groovy enough to serve as background music for fighting. For some reason, I feel like this track could have easily been part of the Death Note OST. Maybe it's because I've been rewatching it recently, but do you know what I mean? While I do love the vibe I get from Authentic Sky, and I do think it fits the stage quite well, it does sound almost a bit too cozy, honestly. Around the middle, the track becomes even more quiet for a short while, and if I ignore its actual in-game purpose for a moment, I get the feeling that this would have been an awesome menu track. Maybe for a customization mode or something of that sort. Regardless of that, once I put actual gameplay from this stage over it, it does work really well. There is one sample at the very beginning that sounds like a pitched wind sound, and small details like these really add to the stage's identity. When you're actually in-game, it seems like you can even hear a more pronounced wind sound, as well as the helicopter circling the building you're atop of. Once again, Authentic Sky and its soothing, yet somehow melancholic vibe remind me of Tekken 2's opening movie with Kazuya staring out the window of a high floor in what's probably a Mishima Zaibatsu building. The same vibe I also got from Tag 1's opening movie. I don't know, there's something about purple suit Kazuya and skyscraper rooftops that I find alarmingly satisfying. There's not much I want to criticize here. I do think that the drums could have received a slightly busier arrangement just to add a tiny layer of extra intensity during fights, but otherwise I like it a lot. So, I have no idea what happened to Mob, but this track's mix sounds like absolute horseshit. The sound design in general sounds utterly abysmal, like the whole track has been muffled, compressed to hell and back and then muffled again. I don't know how to describe it with the exact terms, I'm not an audio engineer, but this sound is really bad. It's just bad. It's so bad that I don't even want to listen to the track for its musical ideas, which is quite a shame. The overall vibe screams Tekken 3 to me. We have a very rock-centered sound, with one guitar riff sample repeating over and over. The stage for this tune is underground, where you fight in a small, closed room with a ring of people surrounding you at all times. The vibe of the stage is very cool, and the track does fit it quite nicely. I really enjoy the melody that starts around the 50-second mark. The chords of the riff underneath also change during this section, offering more harmonic substance, which I always enjoy. Sadly, none of this is enough to make up for the abysmal sound design here, and I can't see myself returning to this track for this reason alone. It really sounds like someone screwed up at some stage during post-production, and they just went with it because of a tight schedule or whatever. I know that the in-game crowd is very loud, so maybe it was an attempt to fit the music underneath these noises, but at the end of the day, it just sounds horrible to me. Let's move on. The moment this track starts playing, I'm hyped. Kitsch is so incredibly iconic, I must have heard it a million times in YouTube videos alone. The track has very strong fusion vibes, with the jazzy piano chords and the funky bass. I'm quite surprised how such a fast synth lick could possibly be so memorable, but here we are. Whenever you hear this, it's instantly recognizable, even though it's not really a singable melody in the traditional sense. It's also played quite often in this 4-minute track, which is always a good strategy if you want to hook your listeners. The vocals also fit very nicely into the mix. They have a very soothing timbre, which goes perfectly with the piano chords in the back. This little synth melody we get afterwards is also very enjoyable. It's rather relaxed and sits comfortably between the other instruments with no need to take too much attention away. All in all, I love Kitsch. It works so well as fighting game music due to its groovy nature and the opening lick serving as a perfect transitional section between its various parts. It's not too in your face to distract from gameplay, but it's so rich in pleasant musical details that listening to it on its own is incredibly rewarding. So far, Tekken 4 is on a crazy pace with amazing tunes. Still, Kitsch proves itself as one of the best in this game, possibly even the best for me. But let's give the remaining tracks a fair shot too, shall we? Quadra is a rather interesting case of Tekken OST pieces. It's a unique title that only plays if you join the game as player 2. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time we've had a track for this specific occasion, isn't it? Sadly, this is another track that suffers from an overall rather unpleasant sound. It seems like the thing has been bit crushed or something similar. The whole thing is so grainy and crunchy, but not in a good way. Overall, I'm not a big fan. There's not much in here that really sparks my interest. The one section towards the middle that gets increasingly dense has some cool ideas. But with this overall sound, I barely want to listen to it. Not my cup of tea, I guess, but I do wonder, do any of you find this appealing? Tell me in the comments what you think. Ironically, the next track is called Bit Crusher. My first thought when I listened to this was Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
Remind me, Turtle. Get that fixed.
This track has a very specific attitude, but I don't know if there's a name for it. In terms of musical ideas and instrumentation, I adore this tune. The main motif is catchy, the brass section is powerful, the bass is groovy. There's a point around 2 minutes in where the whole thing just collapses, starting with the wind instruments. I really like this for some reason. What I really don't enjoy is yet another instance of a, in my opinion, completely unnecessary speaking voice with heavy effects layered on top of it. To me, it sounds funny, if anything, but not enjoyable. It makes the whole track feel even more crazy than it already is, but I don't think the track needs that at all. The outro features the main melody played by the keyboards, and its sound is over-modulating like crazy. It's placed perfectly at the climactic point of this composition, announcing its end. I do need to mention that the mix in this song is a bit unusual to me. The bass is incredibly loud, which is awesome at the very beginning, as you can really hear it set the tone for the next 5 minutes. But once more and more instruments join in, it feels a bit unbalanced. A small gripe, all things considered. The Shinjuku stage is also a nice fit. A busy street at night with all the shiny shop lights in the background. Feels great to look at. Overall, Bit Crusher is a fantastic entry, maybe even top 10 in this game, or possibly even higher. We'll see about that. I really enjoyed this one. Let's hear what's next. Next up is Fear from the Laboratory stage. Fittingly, it has a strong futuristic sci-fi vibe, mostly caused by the long, high synth sounds and the lack of any traditional acoustic instruments. There are a lot of delay and reverb effects placed on, well, probably every single sound in here. It makes everything sound even more surreal. I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but here we have yet another completely unique sound in Tekken 4. This game truly packs a ton of variety, much appreciated. While I like the pairing with the laboratory, I do have to say that its visual design doesn't really do the soundtrack justice. The music sounds like a laboratory that is so futuristic you wouldn't even know where the hell you are if you look inside. However, the white lights and the smoke machines definitely help building the right ambience for this track. At some point we can even hear voices that are also layered with effects. Shortly after, we even get some brief string action. On first glance, Fear is built with not that many components. But if you listen carefully, there is always some sound somewhere in the background sneakily building towards this peculiar atmosphere. I really like this aspect, and I like this track in general. Even though it's on the slower side, the drums still keep everything together while everything else has enough time and space to unfold properly. Amazing. Now it's time for a stage that's very infamous for its unusual layout, and Hwoarang's ending.
What do you want?
Parking area comes with a gym track and has a very fuzzy guitar riff as the backbone of its musical composition. Another one that is very reminiscent of Tekken 3. While I love me some heavy guitars, I do find this guitar tone to be a bit too penetrating in this mix. Maybe it's just the loudness, or maybe there's too much gain on it. Perhaps it's even both. I find the guitar a bit unpleasant to listen to, which is a shame since the riff, while pretty basic, is quite cool. The drum sounds fit pretty well for this song and the stage pairing. I just wish they weren't mostly swallowed by the guitar. What a weird thing to say as a guitarist. After a few listens, I notice how bored I get listening to Jim. The riff is neat for a couple of rounds, but it starts getting repetitive quite fast. I mean, we do get the break in the form of a somewhat calmer section here and there. These also really sound like a parking lot, I suppose, but don't really offer anything that seems particularly interesting to me. In isolation, Jim is decent. Not a bad track at all, but it really pales in comparison to all the great tracks we covered before it. It's alright, but nothing noteworthy. Touch and Go has a strong lo-fi neo-soul vibe to it. I love how groovy the opening section is. The short melody is quick but memorable. The delay effect makes it sound so airy, which I guess is very appropriate for the airport stage. The more pronounced synth melody in the following section is also beautiful. It offers quite a contrast to the more reserved opening melody, but is also very powerful in its own way. These two melodies even trade the spotlight shortly, which I enjoy a lot. This is one of these tracks that instantly presents what kind of atmosphere it wants to build, and then just delivers it perfectly. If you don't like the idea behind it, I suppose this might be boring for you, but for me, Touch and Go is really engaging. Everything about it is so laid back, with just enough tension in the melodic and rhythmic components to keep you grooving along, and not a single bit more. The airport stage is also very beautiful to look at, not at all like what I usually see when I'm at an airport. The dark blue sky above, the colorful skyline in the far distance, the relaxing waves in the back. Everything comes together so nicely, I love it. This might turn out to be one of my absolute favorites from Tekken 4, even though I feel like I've said this sentence quite a few times already. But that's a good thing. Let's see which of these tracks actually retain this position by the end of the script. Alright, so Inner Shrine is an absolute banger of a track. It plays at Honmaru, a console-exclusive stage that is actually the location of the canon Tekken 4 ending and the Tekken 5 intro movie. God, I love that intro movie and Tekken 5's presentation in general. I have so much nostalgia for this game, I can't wait to cover its OST next up. If you've enjoyed this video so far and are also extremely hyped for the Tekken 5 soundtrack, make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you get notified once the video is up. The Inner Shrine kicks off with a wooden percussion instrument that I don't recognize. It sounds really cool though, really gives off some shrine vibes. I also really enjoy the bass in this one. Is this the first time we got slapping bass in Tekken 4? I think so. It sounds fantastic and fits right into the mix. Inner Shrine really lays low for a while, which leaves enough time to build towards this incredibly suspenseful vibe. Eventually, it explodes into the busier section, and this melody right here is so ingrained in my memory. It's very reminiscent of the melody in the opening movie, which is brilliant. After all, the plot that's been set up in the intro is finally resolved in this place, where Jin confronts both his father and grandfather, or is forcibly being confronted, depends on the ending you get. Also, I love the integration of the electric guitar in this track, both in the calm and busy sections. It's mostly in the background supporting the rhythmic side of this tune, but it achieves that so brilliantly. This track offers a perfect mix of calm, layered synth chords with a very soothing character and a constant barrage of very earthy drumming and percussion playing. I really love Inner Shrine. I had completely forgotten about this track, truth be told, but the moment I heard the vocal melody for the first time again, I had instant goosebumps. It's crazy how I'm eating my words this quickly again, but I'm not sure if any of the other tracks can compete with this. Even the opening movie song, with all of its crazy parts and amazing atmosphere, doesn't hold my attention as consistently as this track. I just finished listening to an extended version that was more than 10 minutes long, and I barely noticed. That's how impressive it feels. What an absolute brilliant display of video game music composition/production. I doubt it gets any better than this. And quite frankly, it really doesn't need to. Inner Shrine is definitely top 10 or maybe even top 5 all-time Tekken soundtracks material. Still, let's give the other tracks a fair shot too. Wirepuller Appearance. What the fuck is that name? Wirepuller Appearance is a very short track that plays when this game's final boss Heihachi enters the stage. The drums are very busy and have a very harsh sound, but it kind of fits in this brief context. I like the guitar just laying a chord down and the bass playing a few of the higher notes. A nice contrast to the explosive drums. Considering that all of this occurs in the arena stage, I guess this vibe does fit, but this song is too short to really evoke an emotion. I guess it's fine for its purpose, but nothing more. Let's continue. We're getting closer to the end, as the strongest Iron Arena plays in the arena stage. Who would have guessed? This is where your arcade runs of Tekken 4 end, and where nightmares about Diaper Heihachi are born. Once again, we have a rock music vibe mixed into an otherwise very industrial electronic sound. I like the fast pace of this track. The first section of this tune is rather repetitive. However, in the following section, the bass moves through different notes, implying a nice harmonic progression underneath the busy drumming. Lovely. I also enjoy the riff from the guitar. It's very basic, but groovy, and makes for a hype mood during the final fight. It also pairs really nicely with Arena's visuals. One thing I need to remark though is that both this track and the stage don't really feel like Tekken final stages. If you compare them to Tekken 2's, 3's and Tag's final boss fights, the atmosphere of those typically has something outstandingly eerie, melancholic and dark about them. This is typically strongly supported by the music, and I always enjoyed how special these final encounters and their tunes feel. Tekken 4 kinda drops the ball on this, in my eyes. I know they probably did this intentionally, as choosing Heihachi as the final villain is also a stark contrast to previous entries, just like many other things in Tekken 4. But that always felt disappointing to me, and it's still the case after taking a closer look in this track. I do know that the Inner Shrine, aka Honmaru, is the actual final stage for the canon ending, and there both the stage and music scream final boss in my eyes. But while it's cool to have exclusive stages like that reserved for hype story moments, I'm still disappointed by how the rest of the arcade runs inevitably end. I'm really curious, do you enjoy this stage and Heihachi as the final fight? Do you like the soundtrack as the climactic music of most Tekken 4 stories? I, for one, wish they had done it a bit differently, but while not being one of my favorites, the strongest Iron Arena is still a solid entry. Next up is Nothingness, Tekken 4's Continue, Game Over and Name Entry song. Did we even have a Game Over song in Tekken Tag Tournament? Maybe it was too short and I didn't cover it. This track is freaking dark. Immediately it feels like I'm being thrown into an endless abyss. This is mostly due to the extremely low rumbling of the bass, as well as some of these windy synth sounds. Probably not the most accurate description, but I hope you know what I mean. Some of these elements even sound like someone recorded vocals and then layered tons of effects on top of them until they were barely recognizable. Listen closely. This kind of reminds me of Relentless from Fear and Hunger 2 Termina. Do you hear the similarity? Game over / continue songs are not something you'd listen to for more than a few seconds in-game, but I like that they went out of their way to create something that reeks of desperation and sorrow. Actually, I suppose the name entry also takes a little bit, so you do get an opportunity to enjoy this. I quite like it. A nice little tune for sure. Lights is the results theme. For some reason, it gives me Hotline Miami vibes, although I couldn't really pinpoint which track exactly. To me, Lights sounds exactly what I imagine it must feel to brawl your way through numerous opponents in hand-to-hand combat, defeat Daipa Heihachi himself, and set off into the sunset as you finally accomplished your goal, whatever it might be. Most of the high notes in here have a sound that I can only describe as ethereal. It feels like they all shimmer acoustically. Does that even make sense? I suppose it's got to do with heavy use of delay effects, and it works wonders. I like how minimalist the drumming is. No fancy fills, no needless wankery, just a basic pattern to carry the music forward. What I particularly enjoy is this one synth note that starts as a low sawtooth sound and then shoots up into a higher note. I really love this one element, and since the overall track is so reserved, it feels like this small detail has so much room to express itself. This gives me, the listener, something to look forward to when I listen to Lights. Something to break out of the cozy monotony occasionally, and it works incredibly well in that regard. I like Lights. It's not the flashiest or most interesting of tracks, but it serves its purpose well. In my previous video on Tekken Tag Tournament, as well as in Tekken 2, we saw how unique and cool staff roll themes can turn out. Hex follows this trend, at least in the uniqueness regard. The track opens with static noise, a few sinus tones that immediately build some tension, and a short voice line. Very eerie and, well, digital, I guess. One by one, the more musical elements enter stage and create a groove with a lot of forward momentum. During the next section, Hex becomes busier and adds a lot more rhythmic elements that are modulated in pitch and color. Eventually we get a melody with a very thick, sharp sound. This is the first thing that seems truly memorable in here. It sounds quite cool. The end cuts off with some static noise and a few sinus tones, just like it started. Really doubles down on this idea of digital dystopia we mentioned earlier. I'm not entirely sure what to think of this tune. When I try to find words for it, I'm leaning towards interesting, but not necessarily enjoyable. Listening to it a few times is nice, because there are a lot of sounds to discover, and you are rewarded for listening closely. It also does have an ending character to it, so it certainly fits the staff roll in that regard. I wouldn't really listen to this just for the sake of it though, so I suppose it's just alright in my book. Sadly not up to par with Landscape Under the Ghost from Tekken 2 or the staff roll from Tag 1. But what can you do? The final track for today is Unknown. You know what's funny? I initially thought that Draw the Waveform is the track that plays during the character epilogues, so I wrote half a page about my opinion on it, recorded and even almost finished editing that section when I discovered that it actually isn't. It was used in the arcade version for specific occurrences, and is still used in the full release of Tekken 4 during Paul's ending movie, but that doesn't really warrant a detailed coverage in this video. Instead, I'll briefly talk about the actual epilogue track called Unknown. This track does not match its counterpart Fetus from the prologues in terms of being anxious or suspenseful. Rather, I perceive this overall sound as being somewhat in a dreamy or even comatose state. It reeks of uncertainty and doubt. This fits insanely well with some of these epilogues, while others of course don't match with this rather serious tone. There's not too much to look at in detail here, as the track is more or less one plane of sound that goes on and on for all eternity. But that's exactly what gives it this touch of unease. This is not something to put on for active listening, but it's phenomenal for enhancing these beautifully drawn images and sometimes heavy-hitting story bits with the perfect atmospherical background music. It feels very fitting for Tekken 4 overall, and I love the fact that we can end this OST analysis on a high note like this one. Okay, so these were all of the tracks for today, but there is one more stage that flew right under my radar while writing the majority of this script. It's a secret stage you only unlock by finishing the arcade story mode with Steve. You see, Steve is essentially the poster boy for this game's new characters, and he has a story connection to Nina. Before Nina was put into cryosleep for 20 years right after Tekken 2, the Mishima Zaibatsu experimented on creating more durable test subjects for their various shenanigans. Steve is the result, and Nina his biological mother. A new character with a connection to the past, the pre-Tekken 3 era specifically. And lo and behold, the music that plays for this familial showdown is a random track from the Tekken 2 and Tekken 1 arcade soundtracks. This idea is so ingenious, I love it so much. What a beautiful nod to the legacy of the music of this franchise and all of the people who helped forge it over the years. I'm really glad I went back and discovered this too. Alright, time for the verdict. Tekken 4, is the music good? It's fantastic, actually. I'm quite surprised how much I like this OST. I have to go back and check the exact numbers, but from my feeling alone, there was a very high percentage of good to great songs in here, and very few that felt boring or disappointing. I don't think this has ever been the case in the series so far. That alone speaks volumes. Among my absolute favorites that are high, if not top tier, are A Fist for a Fist, for its incredible ability to draw you into the story of this game with the opening shot alone, Jet for its incredibly unique approach to a character select theme, Fetus for being so unbelievably suspenseful, Authentic Sky for its cozy yet melancholic nature, Kitsch for, well, pretty much everything it does, really. Bit Crusher for its amazing brass section and reminding me of SpongeBob, which is always a plus in my book. Touch and Go for its funky nature and its amazing pairing with stage visuals, and probably my favorite in the entire game, The Inner Shrine, for all of the reasons I mentioned before. Immediate goosebumps. This was, 8 tracks now? That are all fantastic in their own right? I considered not including some of them, just because I felt like there's too many, but they all deserve their spot as favorites. There are a few tracks that are still enjoyable, but just not quite there, including Acid, Timpani, Didgerhythm, and Fear, the latter being my favorite out of these 3, just not quite up there with the others. That's 11 out of 21 tracks that are at least very good, if not amazing. What an incredible track record. The other tracks are mostly just not interesting enough for me. There are 3 exceptions, however, being the tracks Mog, Quadra, and Jim. They all shoot for a Tekken 3-esque vibe, with sampled rock guitars at the forefront of their compositions. However, they all feel like the mix has been butchered, and they are just unpleasant to listen to for that fact alone. I don't know how intentional that was, but it feels like something went wrong at the final stages of their production. Overall, I really need to sing Tekken 4's praises here. So many amazing tunes, so few that I don't enjoy. The tone of the entire OST also feels very consistent, even though it features tons of variety. As a bonus edition, they even included Kazuya's Tekken 2 arcade song Emotionless Passion in the Tekken Force mode. I adore this tune, so I guess you can add another one onto the list. I'm genuinely surprised how strong this OST turned out to be. Its strongest tunes can definitely compete with my favorites from the other games, and the ridiculously high percentage of absolute bangers really makes me want to put Tekken 4 as the uncontested king of Iron Fist music. So far, at least. Who knows what the remaining titles will do to shake up this hierarchy, and I'd definitely like to make some more specific comparisons in the future, for example ranking each intro movie song, going into more detail and drawing exact comparisons as to which ones I like the most and which ones the least. Would you be interested in watching something like that? Tell me in the comments what you think. Regardless of side projects, this series will continue directly with the soundtrack of Tekken 5. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, it helps me out a ton. If you're as hyped for Tekken 5 as I am, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. Until then, I thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.